Hi, my name is Dr. John Ringman. I'm a neurologist at the University of Southern California. I specialize in Alzheimer's disease, seeing patients and doing research in Alzheimer's disease. Here today, we're at the University of Guadalajara, specifically in Los Altos, Cuauhtos. So approximately 20 years ago, when working as a neurologist at the University of California at Irvine, I saw a patient in clinic that was 42 years old, a woman presenting with a few-year history of progressive memory problems. And at age 4, she also had a very strong family history of a similar illness and other people in her family presenting around the same age. At the time, the genes that cause a young onset form of Alzheimer's disease had recently been identified. So we tested her, and she turned out to have a causative genetic alteration, which was the etiology of her illness. Of note, she was from Guadalajara originally. Subsequently, over the years, we saw a number of families that had a similar presentation, a similar problem, around the same age with strong family histories, and when tested, it turned out that many families had the same genetic alteration. And when you spoke with them, most of these families could trace their roots from Jalisco, a state in Mexico. So for the last 20 years, we've been studying these families and trying to understand more and more about the disease, not just this genetic form of Alzheimer's disease, but how it relates to late onset Alzheimer's disease. And over the years, that's led to collaborations with other investigators and physicians in Mexico City, but more and more in the Jalisco state. Over time, we've come to realize that many of these families trace their roots to Jalisco state in Mexico, and specifically in Los Altos, the Los Altos region of Jalisco, that is northeast of Guadalajara, and with the highest concentration apparently being in the town of Tepatitlan, which is where we are today. Because most of the families that we've seen with this same genetic change can trace their roots to this area, it most likely represents a founder effect. So what that means is that of the 70 or more families we've seen with this genetic alteration, they're all distantly related. They can be considered distant cousins of one another. Not only do we know that from where they're from and because of this mutation, but we've also done some analysis on some of the families indicating that not only do they share this specific genetic alteration, but they share much of the DNA around it. So meaning that they've inherited this big chunk of DNA in common. So that is further evidence that this comes from a common source. So this illness, unfortunately, is what we call autosomal dominant, which what that means is if you're affected by the illness, then each of your children has a 50% chance of inheriting it. If they've inherited it, then their children are also a 50% chance of inheriting it. So we're trying our best to better understand the disease and ultimately develop treatments to potentially prevent it. I think, though, unless people have fewer children, where we are going to see it continue. So we now know that there are other founder effects representing large families with the same mutation. For example, the most well characterized is a family, one large extended family from the country of Colombia. It's a mutation in the same gene, but it's a distinct mutation and therefore unrelated with regards to the families not being related. The age of onset with that mutation is generally in the mid-40s to around 50, whereas unfortunately the so-called Jalisco mutation has a younger onset, usually around age 40. In addition, people who have the Jalisco mutation can sometimes develop significant problems with walking, and that can actually be one of their first symptoms. The course appears to be somewhat more aggressive with the the time from symptom onset to ultimate death being varying, but probably around 8 years, which is a little more rapid than you'd see with either the Colombian mutation or particularly with the more common form of late onset Alzheimer's disease. Has been described all over the world. In fact, the first families were described in England. The concentrations of large numbers of families originating as a founder effect, as descent from a common person, are most described here in Jalisco, the family in Colombia, and also there's a large number of families originating from Puerto Rico. There's an additional large founder effect in a different mutation, the same gene apparently originating in Italy. But in general, this illness is not confined to any one ethnic or racial group. Many of these families that have been described are really single families, and only a few members having been studied. So these are sometimes referred to as private mutations. But in general, this condition can be found all over the world. So over the years, we've seen families with different mutations causing this form of Alzheimer's disease. Because of immigration patterns, though, in Los Angeles, we've seen a particularly high number of families with this Jalisco mutation. So though we're interested in studying all these different families with different mutations, our research is focused on persons of Mexican origin with autosomal dominant Alzheimer's disease.